Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming to the talk. I'm going to talk about some work that colleagues and I have recently done looking at the impact of direct paternal care on child growth rates in a population of Shotogor I work with in Bangladesh. This paper just recently came out and it's open access. So if you'd like to take a look at it, you can scan the QR code here at the bottom. I'll put it up again at the end of the talk too, so you can get it then. So let's start off by looking at human fathers in evolutionary perspective. As everybody watching this is probably quite well aware, um, unlike most other mammals, human fathers cooperate with mothers to care for their young to a really extraordinary degree. Adaptive frameworks assume that this behavior evolved to support human life history pattern of raising slowly developing, energetically costly offspring. But in other mammals and in non-mammalian species, when fathers consistently invest in offspring, there's usually a clear benefit to offspring survival that we just don't consistently see in humans, despite decades of study. Instead, human fathering is expressed facultatively across cultures in both the amount and the type of investment that fathers provide. And the impacts of fathers' investments on fitness outcomes are similarly variable. One reason for this variability might be that human mothers and fathers provide care within a broader network of caregivers, which this figure does a really nice job of displaying. This comes from a paper recently out by Courtney Helfrecht and Courtney Meehan and their colleagues. And so what we should expect is that fathers should be sensitive to the care that's provided by others when making decisions about how to invest their own time and energy. We should also expect that when fathers provide care in different contexts vis-a-vis other caregivers, there will be differences in their impacts on fitness related outcomes for children. So two particular contexts have really been highlighted in the literature, and we're going to explore the impacts of these contexts on child outcomes in this talk. When care is additive, meaning that maternal care remains constant, mothers don't adjust the amount of care they provide, then any additional care from others is a net benefit to the total amount of care that a focal offspring receives. And the result should be an observable positive impact on child outcomes. When care substitutes for mother's care, on the other hand, the total amount of care a focal child receives remains the same, and the result should be no observable impact on that focal child. Of course, substitutive care can provide fitness benefits through other pathways. I'm not going to focus on those pathways, though, today in this talk. The population I work with calls themselves Shotogor. They are traditionally boat dwelling and semi nomadic communities who live on the rivers and canals in Bangladesh. And they represent a minority ethnicity in the country who are culturally distinct from the majority Muslim and Hindu populations. I specifically work with 5 communities of Shotogor families in Matla, Bangladesh, which is represented up in the corner here in this black box. And the families I work with are either currently living on boats or have moved onto the land within the last 5 to 10 years. In order to collect the data, I work with this team of 4 excellent local researchers, and I want to just take a minute and acknowledge them here before I go on because they're really, really responsible for all the day-to-day operations and data collection that happen in my projects. So let me give you a little bit of context here in terms of division of labor among Shotogor households. Among the households that I work with, 95% of the men fish as their primary occupation, whereas women are split almost in half, with about 45% working as fishers and about 53% in any given year working as traders. There are a lot of really interesting things about these 2 different occupations that lead to lots of different types of outcomes. But the most interesting thing that is most relevant to this talk is that fishing is completely compatible with childcare. Women take infants, toddlers, and kids of all different ages with them when they go fishing. Whereas trading is totally incompatible with childcare, which means that women leave their kids at home and they need help caring for those children in order to go to work. That has really important implications for paternal caregiving, as I'll talk about in just a minute. The Bangladeshi seasonal ecology also has really important implications for divisions of labor. So during the rainy season, large portions of the country flood, and Matlab, which is demarcated by the red dot in the middle of the map there, is almost totally submerged in water, with a lot of primarily the auxiliary roadways completely underwater. And so it's just really impossible to access more remote areas by foot or by vehicle. Seasonality doesn't have a huge impact on divisions of labor in fishing families. Mothers and fathers fish together year round and they take their kids with them when they go fishing, and this doesn't change seasonally. But in trading families, the inability to access villages during the rainy season means that mothers can't really go trading at that time. So fathers typically fish with other men, and mothers stay home and care for children during the rainy season. During the dry season, though, mothers go trading during the day. They're usually gone all day long. And fathers often stay home as the primary caregivers for their children in these households. Differences in division of labor result in different contexts under which fathers give care in Shotagore households. So in fishing households, paternal care is assumed to be additive. Mothers and fathers are on their fishing boats with their kids all day, every day, and we don't have a reason to expect that mothers are decreasing the amount of care that they would otherwise provide. And so any care provided by fathers under these conditions should be additive. Meaning that overall, we expect kids in fishing households to receive more care. By contrast, in trading households, during the dry seasons when mothers are working, fathers' care is given as a substitute for mothers. Fathers are often the primary caregivers, as I said, for their young children. Children, by what I mean by young children, is that they're typically between the ages of around 2 to around 6 years old. And fathers in these cases are really responsible for all types of direct care that a mother would be responsible for. So that includes things like feeding, bathing, giving kids naps, disciplining them, supervising them while they play with their friends. This is a really intensive type of caregiving that fathers provide. And they do it for about 6 months out of the year for about 4 years for each of their child's lives. The data really bear out these differences. When you look at paternal and maternal care in fishing households, they don't differ a whole lot by season. And so we wouldn't expect to see major seasonal differences in how caregiving would impact child outcomes. However, in trading households, we really do see this flip between seasons for father's care and mother's care. So, based on these differences, as well as what theory suggests regarding contexts of care, we can make some predictions about how these contexts might impact child growth, which is an important indicator of fitness. So, we predict that more additive care will be associated with faster child growth. We predict no significant difference in growth rates between seasons when fathers care and when mothers care, because we expect kids to receive approximately the same amount of care in each season. And we predict no relationship between the amount of substitutive care and child growth. Taking all of this together, we expect that compared to substitutive care, children receiving additive paternal care should both grow faster and have larger cumulative body sizes. In order to test these predictions, we're using longitudinal data that were collected between 2017 and 2019. Interview data resulted in three different paternal care variables, but I'm going to talk about those when I go through the models in just a minute. Our outcome variables are height, weight, and BMI. Height and weight are collected at the end of each rainy season and end of each dry season every year for all children and adults in the population. Our sample size includes 103 children for whom there were no missing data and at least 2 consecutive seasons of anthropometric measurements. We ran 4 different Bayesian linear mixed models to test our predictions. I'm not going to go through all of this here. I just want to highlight a couple of points for you all. So in addition to fixed effects, every model included random effects for individual ID and household in order to account for repeated measures and common household environments. This top model here, the cumulative growth model, the outcomes of interest are Z-scores for height, weight, and BMI, and these are population specific, accounting for age and sex. And the other three models, outcomes variables of interest, are growth velocities. So these are growth rates that were calculated by looking at changes in Z-scores between consecutive seasons. All right, so let's look at some results here. First, we wanted to examine the impact of seasonality on child growth in trading and fishing households. And so the seasonal growth model had a couple of really interesting results. One is that during the dry season in fishing households, because we have this interaction variable here, this is telling us about fishing households, children gain height, weight, and BMI at a faster rate than they do during the rainy season in fishing households, and that's contrary to what we expected. In trading households, however, and also contrary to what we expected, during the dry season, which is when fathers are providing care, kids are gaining BMI and weight at a slower rate than they are during the rainy season, which is when mothers are providing most of the care. Next, in order to test the direct impacts of additive and substitutive care on growth, we look at proportion of father care and caregiving context. And so what we can see here is that, again, because of the interaction variable here, this is telling us about the amount of care fathers provide when care is additive. So in addition to mothers, and the more care, the more additive care fathers provide, the faster children gain height, although there seems to be no impact on weight or BMI. And then by contrast, and that's as we expected additive care to have a positive impact on outcomes. By contrast, when fathers are providing substitutive care, the more substitutive care fathers provide, the slower kids gain weight and BMI. Next, in order to directly compare the impact of fathers to the impact of mothers, and kind of provide a robustness test for our other models, we're looking at a downsample model, and we find that when father is the primary caregiver, children gain BMI and probably weight at a slower rate than they do when mother is the primary caregiver. And so that's also contrary to our predictions. We predicted no significant difference. Finally, also contrary to our predictions, what we see here was very surprising, and that kids in trading households, so this is a cumulative growth model, we're looking at Z-score outcomes here. Kids in trading households have, on average, larger body sizes than kids in fishing households, with greater weight, greater BMIs, and they're probably taller as well. So if we take all of these results together, what we can see here is that additive care does have a small positive impact on child growth as we predicted, but the impact might be somewhat inconsistent given the seasonal change in growth velocities for kids in fishing households. So there's certainly more work that needs to be done to understand the impacts of additive care for Schoedegor kids. Substitutive care has a predictable but negative impact on child growth. And what this is really indicating is that, again, contrary to our predictions, when fathers are the primary caregivers, children are either receiving less care or they're receiving lower quality care than when mothers are primary. But another way that we can think about this is that when mothers are primary, kids are just growing faster than when fathers are primary. So it may not be that fathers are bad as much as it is that mothers are just a little bit better. What we also saw when we created this counterfactual plot from the father care model was something suggesting that essentially, as fathers get more help, which is what this end of the x-axis is representing, they're still the primary caregivers, but they're receiving help from allo parents, that kids are actually growing at a faster rate. And so allo parents might be buffering against some of the negative impact of father's solo care. In addition to the importance of allo parents, we think that kids could be experiencing some catch up growth during seasons when mothers are providing care. And overall, deficits from paternal care during the dry season aren't preventing long term or aren't having long term impacts that prevent children from achieving bigger body sizes, at least bigger body sizes than their fishing counterparts. So we know that fathers invest within a complex network of mothers and other caregivers. And what we're suggesting in this paper is that specifically the context in which fathers invest relative to others should affect observable fitness outcomes. We provide a little bit of support for that, but basically our results are suggesting that in a society where fathers provide very high levels of direct care under both contexts, that caregiving in addition to mothers might be having some positive effects on child physiology, while care that substitutes for mothers seems to be having some relatively minor but still negative impacts, but that those might be offset by care from mothers and allo parents. I want to thank the Shotogor communities I work with in Matla, Bangladesh, as well as my field team and all of my collaborators at ICDDRB. Thank you very much.